many of you know Balji. He's a veteran journalist with more than 40 years experience. Balji, I'm normally the oldest person in the room, but I can only claim 3 decades. So I defer here, and I'm very, very pleased to see that there are people who've survived longer than I have in journalism. Um, His experience, though, is really incredible. It spans print, broadcast, and digital journalism. I'm clearly one of Singapore's most well-known media personalities. He's done communications advisory services to both public and private sector organizations in the country, including government ministries, statutory boards, and tertiary institutions. I know him because I've seen him at a distance at WAN-IFRA events where he often speaks. His 2019 book, The Reluctant Editor, the Singapore media scene through the eyes of a veteran newspaper journalist, is both compelling narrative, but also a really hard look at doing journalism under pressure. And it is that doing journalism under pressure that he's going to really talk to us about today. He's going to talk also about our need to be able to manage both up and down. But I think most importantly today, Balji is going to talk to us about why the new media order needs new journalism training. So over to you, Balji.
Thank you very much. Uh, Normally, this is my time to have a snooze. That has been disrupted. It's okay, I don't mind. Which means that I can sleep much earlier tonight. And but I'm very thankful for Juni for inviting me to be here. It's always good to talk about journalism. It's always good to talk about journalism. It's always good to talk to young people about journalism, and that is because mainly because they know very little about journalism. So that makes me an expert, you know. I will launch into my talk straight away. So the title I have picked for this talk is a new media order. It's not new media in new media, but the order is new. So it's a new media order needs new journalism thinking. It's not a headline that I will write for a newspaper, definitely not for the new paper. But since I'm dealing with journalism intellectuals, so I thought this kind of a headline will be good. Okay, let me start quickly. I think I want to start with something that maybe you all know about, but I think it's important to have that understanding and that underpinning, in what we are going to talk about. And that is most media outlets, not just in Singapore, but in I would say in nearly every part of the world, what I would say in intensive care. Some have gone under. Those who want to enter, those I mean, some of them have gone under. Some of them are somehow, some of them are sinking. Some of them are trying to swim. So it's really a state of flux that the media is in. I don't think in my about 40-year career I have seen such a state of siege that the media is in today. And in Singapore, in a couple of weeks ago, we had this, what I would call the biggest shakeup in the Singapore Press Holdings. Singapore Press Holdings is the publisher of the Straits Times. It has a print monopoly in Singapore. It is more than 170 years. So sometimes I joke with my friends in SPH and said, actually SPH should come, or the Straits Times should come under the Preservation of Monuments Board. It shouldn't be a kind of a profitable entity. And somewhat it is now coming true. SPH has been, the media arm of SPH has been taken off, cut off, and they're going to be parked into a not-for-profit company. And this again shows, even SPH or Straits Times which was earning millions of dollars in profit every year. When I was there, I would call it the boom years of Straits Times. And we were paid huge bonuses, which I don't think the word bonus even applies today. So that's a kind of a fate that the Straits Times, has met. It Straits Times with all the government protection, because government made sure that Straits Times had no real competition as such, direct competition, and they have prospered. But today, if you ask the journalists in Straits Times and the other newspapers under the SPH umbrella, they will tell you that they are worried because they are not sure what their future is going to be. Although the company has assured that there will be no retrenchments. I was surprised that they gave that assurance. Maybe retrenchment in some other form. Okay, so those who want to re-enter journalism, who have taken a couple of years break, a couple of months break for various reasons, and who want to come back to re-enter journalism, I will say they need to rethink their approach to journalism, the approach that they had. All of you had different approaches, I presume. And I would say that you have to rethink that approach because the world has changed and is changing very dramatically. The philosophy of journalism is changing. The writing styles are changing. Presentation is changing. So nearly everything is changing. Even the way the employer-employee relationship is changing. It's not as it used to be many years ago. So in short, I will say, and I know this may not be a right thing to say at this time, but I would say dump everything you have learned. Dump it, reboot and start afresh. I mean, if at all there is some advice I can give you young people, is this, right? Start afresh, reboot. Now, how do you do that? Let me try and break it down. First, I would say all of you have to go back to basics. Rely less on technology. By technology, I mean rely less on the mobile phone for your work. That means, what I mean by that is, don't just sit in the office and make calls or send WhatsApp messages or just look at Facebook. I'm not saying don't look at Facebook, but I find today an inordinate amount of time is spent looking at Facebook and then chasing the story that appears in Facebook. You still have to do that, but there is a huge unexplored area out there in your own countries. And by what do I mean by that? I mean your readers, your society, the people, your citizens. They are undergoing many changes, especially now with COVID. And you need to understand your society. I would say, how many of you understand your society? Even I am trying to understand my society. But I'm so glad that in the last few years, most of the time I spent in talking to people. And these are not people like pre-arranged sessions. I just walk out of my house. I see the construction worker out there and I talk to him. I walk out to my coffee shop, which is about 2 minutes away, and I talk to my coffee shop, the people who are there, who work there. And I really have such engaging conversations with them. And I've given nicknames for them. One of the coffee lady, I call her gangsta sister, right? And the another lady there, I call her Mama San, because she's the one who organizes everything and makes sure that her employees are safe. And the gangsta sister calls me now gangsta brother. So see, we have over the many months we have found out more about each other. I found out that she has a 35-year-old autistic son. She is a single mom, lives in a rental flat, and occasionally she tells me about her son and the difficulties she faced, which are all I would never have, which are stories which I don't get in the newspapers, and which if I had not left journalism and gone on this track, I would not have found out that these are also Singaporeans. So there are lots of stories out there that you can. And sorry, I don't mean that you go there and then look for a story. You don't look for a story. The stories will come to you. When you go back, you after having spoken to these people, you go back, you think about it, and then you're writing a story about something, and your experience with, or my experience with Gangsta Sister will come through in that story. That's what I meant. Don't look at it as, oh, this is now I have to write a story on this coffee shop lady. That's not what I'm proposing. And yeah, so first go back to basics. Rely less on your mobile phone. Go out and meet people. Understand your society. And also one of my favorite phrases, slice of life stories. Sorry, my wife is cooking, so there's a noise coming on. A slice of life stories. By slice of life stories, I mean stories about Singapore, how people lead their lives, children. I mean, children. Just look at our children growing up. I have 2 grandsons, and just watching them, looking at now they are on home-based learning. So I went to their house this morning just to see how they are doing. And there are so many clues that you can get. Jeanette will learn this in a few years. I know, just watching your child grow up. But are all these things reflected in media? I think very little. As I talk about Singapore media, our media is 90% of the stories are from the government. 90% of the stories are also related to minister speeches. And minister speeches are the most dull stories that you can ever have. They keep repeating the same old thing. They use words and phrases which are so blah. So, and if the newspapers or media organizations continue to do that, then they will become irrelevant over time. And the Straits Times has actually shown it, because last year, the media arm of SPH, for the first time, they made losses. First time, as far as I know. Maybe 176 years ago, they were also making losses, but at least in the last 40, 50 years, they were making money, and now they are not. What does that tell you? And this is a newspaper that has been protected by the government, that has been, the government made sure that they had no real competition, still now looking down a deep hole. And one of the, it's such a simple story and a simple idea, right? One of my favorite magazines, although the people who run the magazine say they're a newspaper, The Economist magazine. The first page I turn to is the last page. So that's where the obituary is. And they write such beautiful obituaries. It's not and not just about important people, but sometimes very ordinary people. The latest obituary, which I read yesterday, was about the man who owns a bookshop a dingy bookshop in Bangalore, in India. And what a story it was for me to read. Never knew this guy, but the Economist brought him out. His entire personality came through. And I look at the Straits Times, for example. They don't have obituaries. And even if they write about somebody who passed away, it'll be a very, very a news story. And this is my problem with media today. They are all basing it on news. So what is news? When I started journalism 40 years ago, 45 years ago, I had a tyrant of a news editor who told me that if it didn't happen yesterday, I don't want the story. Or if it didn't happen today, I don't want the story. But you can't use that. I mean, of course, it's not used now. But what I'm saying is news is something that is readable. That's something people say, this is, I didn't know about this. It could have happened 10 years ago. But if people had not known about it, then that's news, right? And so I'm saying rethink, don't all the things that we have been taught, whether in school of journalism or in university, I think it's time to chuck them aside. Okay, the third point, you can actually stop me. If you have some dying questions, you can stop me, because I kind of prefer that way. I see that there's an engagement going on. Looking at your faces, I don't know whether you all are, some of them no faces, but it's okay. Some of them are just photographed. But I don't know whether you're agreeing with me, or you're angry with me, or you're telling yourself that this is all rubbish, because you can see it in the face. So if you have any questions, please ask. Stop me and ask me. So don't have to wait until the end of the session. Third point is I have the three words here. Build a brand. Build a brand around you. You have to have a brand. You cannot anymore rely on one organization for your livelihood. So you have to build a brand. And when you build a brand, others will know about you, other organizations will know about you. And if for some reason you have to leave your present organization because of economic reasons, or because the boss doesn't like your face, the boss doesn't like your voice, so you have to build a brand. I see Jeanette nodding her head vigorously. So build a brand. I think that's very, very important. You all are still very young. Build a brand. I did that many years ago. I don't know why I did it, because I decided that I would not stay on. I've seen my bosses had to leave suddenly and they had not made any preparations for a new life. But of course, they got on okay. And I told myself, I'm not going to be in that position. When my editor-in-chief, for example, was the board, a member of the board went up to him and said, we need your deputy to take over. And my editor-in-chief was only 53 years old. 53 years old, you want to retire? You're asked to go. And that affected me very, very badly. And I told myself, I will never be in that position. And as a result, I started building a brand for myself. I was a very, very reticent character. Juni will tell you, I hardly spoke. The only thing I did in the office was to stroke my beard, like this. Some of them actually asked me, I see you at meetings, I see you just stroking your beard. What are you thinking? I say, no, I'm not going to tell you that. So anyway, you have to build a brand. I mean, I don't have to go into great detail about how to build a brand. I mean, that will take lots and lots of time. But I think you know where I'm coming from. You're building a brand for a very selfish reason, because you want the world to know you, that if something happens to you in your company, there will be, when you go looking for a job, people say, okay, I know this guy, or I know this girl. Some of the points that I've noted down here that you can try to build a brand is start blogging. you have to start and write. But a lot of things. There's so many things that you can write about, honestly. And whether it's on Facebook, I occasionally go to Facebook. Like yesterday, I went to onto Facebook, and I wrote about the obituary, and I was surprised with the kind of course, I added a local element to that obituary about the bookshop seller, and talked about the Brass Bazaar bookshops that people of my generation used to go to buy books, sometimes to steal books because we couldn't afford. And I was in a way surprised that the kind of responses that I got. More than 100 people responded, about maybe 10 of them with comments. The rest were just, what do you call it, reacting or liking it. So what I'm saying is, even a simple thing like putting a post out on Facebook and connecting to your audience, I think that's one of the things that you need to do. Second one is, for those people who want to re-enter or enter the media world, I say, think about freelancing, join the gig economy. And my advice, just recently somebody asked me for my advice, and I said, who wanted to go to mainstream media? So I just asked, why do you want to go to mainstream media? It's a losing proposition, It's a dying business. So think about it. Then she said, okay, then what can I do? I said, go into freelancing, the gig economy. People will then begin to recognize you, and you will get, now content writing is a big thing. I see so many of my friends here have gone into content writing for companies, and writing for banks, and they love journalists because they know that journalists can write well and can communicate with their audience. So think about that. And I already said, avoid the mainstream media. I say mainstream media is stuck in the media in the mud. And also, since I have a lot of spare time these days, so when I follow Facebook, I follow WhatsApp chats, and I noticed that at least 3 people who are very prominent writers are now asking for and saying that they want to set up small outfits, media outfits, and are asking for people whether they are interested in joining them. So there is a lot of these things happening out there, and we need to look. You all need to look out for them. And this is what I just saw on my Facebook, WhatsApp, WhatsApp chats. But there must be many others in many other forms cropping up. I was a very reticent man and always behind the scenes. But how did I do it? I did it because every time I got a chance to have a public talk, I went. Previously, I would never have gone. Okay. Second, then I started writing. I started writing for a newspaper. I started writing for Today. Then after I left mainstream organization, I still write for Yahoo. Why do I write? It's not that Yahoo pays me $10,000 for one article. I don't even know what they pay me. I don't want their money, because I feel it's an insult. So I say, I write for you for free. So I'm building my brand. Every day I'm building my brand. Okay. I had a long session with the former film producer in MediaCorp, Raintree Productions, Daniel Yun. He one day, a few months ago, called me and said, hey, we are doing this coffee talk, filming coffee talk. Would you come and can we interview you? And the topic was about race relations. I said, yes. Straight away, I said yes, because at the back of my mind, I was building a brand for myself. And why shouldn't I, right? So I went, and it was very successful. because I didn't share it with anybody. But there were so many of my friends, some of them I've lost in touch with, were sending me messages. Even at my uh, with one foot in the grave, I still have to build my brand, because if you're out of the public sphere for just maybe even a couple of months, people forget you. People go on to something else. So you have to keep rebuilding your brand all the time. When I was talking about all these things, I was talking about about especially content writing is when you leave the organization, or if you leave the organization. But your blogs, you can have your personal blogs, and the point is you can go and blog. I mean, you can't write about a working mom's life. There are other things that you can do, right? Can't you do videos, right? You can do videos, podcasts. There are different types of pressures. In Singapore, there is the government pressure. It's always there. Sometimes it's and the Singapore government has done it so well that you don't even know there is pressure. They do it. I don't want to go into the details, but so there is a government pressure, and this government pressure. Now, the worst part of this kind of pressure is that it has, in this case, Singapore's case, it has now become self-censorship. Right? Society is changing. You are not changing because you are self-censoring yourself, which is dangerous, right? And the Singapore has this thing called OB markers, which is out of bound markers. How many of our journalists, Singapore journalists, have asked themselves, have the OB markers changed? The OB markers are still there, but the markers have changed, right? Nobody asks that. Nobody tries to test the boundaries, So the pressures will always be there, And I think journalists, young journalists or editors, they all have to try to test the boundaries. So government pressure is always there. There's always the problem of if the government complains to the editor about you, then the fear that you may be in trouble. A number of people have left the organization because of that and doing pretty well now. So the government pressure will always be there. And also learn how to deal with this kind of pressure. Sometimes when you meet government ministers or important people, in Singapore's case especially, one of their favorite ways of putting you on the defensive is look into your face and say, so what's your agenda? Now, how do you deal with in a situation? Learn to deal with that situation. I had a number of times when this question was put to me when I was much younger, and I did not know how to answer, and I looked down, right? But after some time, I said, no, I'm not going to do this. And when I was put that question, I said, I only have one agenda, and that is good journalism. Conversation ended. Conversation ended. So they want to put you on the defensive. So you must know how to get out of it. So the government pressure will be there, and I'm not sure about now, but at one time there was the advertising pressure. Advertisers used to put a lot of pressure on journalists, and some journalists succumb to it. Some journalists work around it by saying, okay, you want something, I will do for you. I will write a story, but not on your terms. I will do it on my terms from a purely journalistic point of view. So how do you can get around that? And also pressure from your editors. And every time you get, there is a pressure, maybe I should use pressure in quotes, is not challenge the editor, but question the editor. Why do you want me to do this? Go into a session with the editor or your supervisor. Why? And try to get the editor to explain to you what is his, where is this pressure coming from? Is there some way I can get around this issue and still get the story published? So you need See, a lot of our journalists, including at my time, we are not trained for all this, but we learn, we fall down, we get up, we learn, we move, and every time you fall down and you get up, you learn. When we were starting the Today newspaper, and when we were deciding on the philosophy and approach of the Today newspaper, some of them suggested we should do a market survey. I was against it because I was sure, I was so convinced, that people don't tell you the truth in a survey. You ask them if you read the editorial pages, they say yes. But if you probe further, you will know they don't read. So I decided not to spend money, and I just did in a very non-traditional way, which is put the various newspapers that are here in Singapore and left a vacuum, a space for today. And we went through each newspaper and what those newspapers stood for, and then asked ourselves a question, is there a space for today? And we finally saw a space, and that space was, at that time I used to call it a bold paper. Bold doesn't mean big headlines, bold in tackling issues. We took that approach, and one of the young journalists who were there present asked me, but won't we get into trouble with the government? Because we were going into analytical reporting, which the government didn't like. Government just wanted you to report the facts. And I felt that we had to do analytical reporting because the other newspapers were not doing it. That was our USP. And I said, I see where you are coming from, I told the reporter, but I have great faith in the Prime Minister, Mr. Goh Chok Tong. I just instinctively knew he will not interfere. And I was right. Because the next 3 years, I was there for 3 years, not once did he or his press secretary intervene. So it's a type of people, you need to understand the person. How do you understand that? I had no real personal interactions with Goh Chok Tong, but the way he spoke when he came on to become Prime Minister, and he said, I'm not going to be the Lee Kuan Yew. He wanted a kinder society, more consensual type of society. And I somehow, in talking to people who knew him, knew that this man will not, if it was Lee Kuan Yew, I think he would have intervened. If it was Lee Hsien Loong, I'm sure he would have intervened. But Goh Chok Tong, something told me he won't, and I was proven right. So it's, call it a gut feeling, not just gut, but gut based on some evidence. So know the person, that you are dealing with is very important. Even if he's a tough character, then how do you deal with that tough character in a way? Sometimes you don't fight battles straight away, right? If you want to win the war. So sometimes you have to lose some battles, give into some battles. These people who are ordering you may not be there for long, right? They have to die one day, or they have to leave one day. So learn to fight your battles in different ways.
Thanks so much, Balji. I just wanted to make sure that if there were any more questions for Balji before we move on. I mean, that's been really interesting. And I think it's interesting how it's repeated some of the things that we've had before. That exhortation to go back to basics, to quality journalism, to rethink the kind of stories we're telling, to really be looking at people's stories. I love the example of the obituary, and bringing people back into newspapers, um, um, uh, um, after all of the kind of statistics and the he said, she said journalism. It's really nice to see someone advocate for that. Build a brand. Do blogging, do social media. If you're trying to get back into the workplace, join the gig economy. Try and do freelance work. Um, we could probably spend a lot more time, Balji, talking about your advice to avoid mainstream media, who seem to have lost the plot when it comes to really serving their audiences. Um, but then finally, just really kind of working on resilience and your ability to be able to deal with pressure.
This looks very common sense. but read. When I mean read all the newspapers that you can get hold of.
mm,
Read
mm,
all the blogs, as many of the blogs that people write.
mm,
I know it's a bit you may not have the time, but you have to make the time. I
mm,
make it a point to read as much as I can on a daily basis, and then from there I come whittle them down to these are the writers I want to read. So for the Straits Times,
mm,
if Christopher Tan, the transport correspondent, writes, I will make sure I read.
mm,
Ravi Vellur, who writes about foreign affairs, I will read. Jonathan Yao, who is also a Europe correspondent in the Straits Times, I will read because they give me, and this is what I want to end up with, they don't just give me the news, they give me knowledge. They don't just give me information, they give me knowledge. Why is it I wait every Saturday morning for the Financial Times weekend edition? It's such a super read. And the way they write, I mean, it's not that they've got very bombastic language, but they whittle down issues in very simple terms. If you look at it, they are actually writing about people all the time about people, but you don't realize they're writing about people. So read as much as you can, see which are the newspapers that are trying to do good work, and see what you can take from them. If at all, this is my final note of advice.
excellent.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you so much, Balji. And good advice to end off with. I think sometimes in the day-to-day grind of journalism, we forget to replenish ourselves and replenish our own knowledge. So that's really good advice. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you very
Um,
much.
Thanks. We're going to move on now to managing your manager. And when I was preparing for the session, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about is so I'm the CEO of a company. Really, what experience am I drawing on in order to really talk about my personal kind of experience in terms of managing a manager? And one of the things that I have to say that when I headed up Enterprise Service, it was a development news agency, and we had virtual newsrooms across Africa. I had a manager who managed me really well, and a manager who reported to me, who managed me really well. And it's always something that I think about, because in the process of him being able to manage me and manage my expectations and my expectations of him, we actually did really good journalism. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I really wanted to say is that there is a Harvard education professor, Chris Anderson, who does research on good work. And he looks at what are the conditions that are required for good work to actually happen. And he has a book called Good Work, actually. And when it comes to journalism, journalism is the one sector where, so most sectors happen when the staff are aligned with the management. But in journalism, good work also happens when there is friction between managers and management. And so I think one of the things that I learned really early as a manager in journalism is to be comfortable with people disagreeing with you, is to be comfortable with people standing up to you, because good journalism happens in that space where people think, and where people don't succumb to groupthink, where people don't also succumb to wanting you to like them, or vice versa. So I'm going to share a couple of things today. It's a lot evidence-based, but also based on my own personal experience. So I think that if you've ever been in a team, kind of, and when we are talking about skills and increasing our skills level, we always think about management as the process that happens downwards. So we all understand about what it means to manage your subordinates. Maybe even a few of us understand what it means to manage the people that we work with, our peers. But what does it really mean to manage upwards? What does it mean to manage the person that you're reporting to? And I think for many journalists, and myself included, right, there is sometimes an antagonistic relationship with the people that we are being managed by. We tolerate them, we kind of understand them, or sometimes, and we adore them, right? I mean, we're willing to do anything for them because we really respect them. We want to be like them. Um, but very often we don't put in the hard work really to understand them as we expect them to understand us. I really do expect somebody who's managing me to understand my strengths and weaknesses, to understand my skills, to be clear about their expectations of me, to really understand what my pressures are, to be thinking of me during COVID and what I'm experiencing. But so the question I want to start off by asking, if you're back in the workplace, do you have the same sense of the people who you report to? Do you understand their current pressures, their current expectations? Um, do you have a sense, do you know what their outputs are, what they are required to actually do, etc.? So I think that's the starting point. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of your manager, and I want you to begin to ask the question, yes, we expect our managers to know a lot about us. How much do we know about our managers? So, what does it mean to manage up? I mean, I think one of the reasons why you really want to manage up, because when you're managing up, when you have a good relationship with the person to whom you report to, it really makes your job easier in order to work to that common goal that both of you are working towards, right? So that you're managing up, so that you both can achieve what your organization is setting out to achieve. Listening to Balji actually was just such a really good reminder about understanding yourself and understanding your values and your principles. What do you stand for? Why are you in journalism? What do you want to achieve? If you're going to stand up to government or to your manager or to advertisers, it really needs someone who is centered in knowing why they are journalists and what they are trying to achieve. And for me, that's my due north, right? I mean, if I'm in an argument, if I'm fighting and I feel like I'm in a no-win situation, I go back to my values. Why do I do journalism? And I'm a journalist from a social justice perspective, you know. Everything. Making money in journalism is about sustaining journalism in or for social justice work. Telling people stories is is about telling stories for social justice work. That's why I'm a journalist. It's the thing that I center myself on all the time. And I see no contradiction between being passionate about social justice and being passionate about journalism that makes a profit, because the one can't survive without the other. And so when I'm thinking about managing up, when I'm thinking about standing up to government, and we just organized a big conference here in South Africa for the South African National Editors Forum, where the relationship between government but also some political parties is really fractious. And for me, the centering is I know why I'm a journalist, I know what I'm doing, and when I'm working with my manager, that when I'm talking about managing my manager, when I'm talking about centering all of those things, that it really is about working towards that common goal. So managing up really is about kind of creating a working environment where you can both work towards a common goal. You also want to manage your manager to manage you better. Part of the process of understanding how your manager works, what your manager's management style is also to get them to understand what your managed style is, when you work best. When I was a very new manager, I was really lucky because I worked with a small team of women who were as invested in my success as I was. I was the first woman to head up a unit, and so for them, me being successful, was important to them as well. But I remember a seminal moment in that was a day when we worked really hard. We broke stories. We just owned the space that we were covering, which was city politics. And one day, one of my staff, in fact, the most junior person in the team, came to me and she said, when we disappoint you, when we upset you, when we don't do what you expect us to do, you don't speak to us and tell us what we've done wrong. You simply keep quiet and then you do the work instead. And it was such an eye-opening moment for me. First of all, because I didn't realize, and then when I thought back, I realized that's in fact what I did, right? I just shut it down, I stopped communicating, and I just took over the work. I didn't actually sit down with them, and I didn't give them feedback, and I didn't correct. Um, so yes, I recognized that she was correct about my behavior, but I also recognized how brave it was for of her to actually tell that to me, to sit down with me and say, this is what you do when and without a judgment that said it was bad. She wasn't saying you're terrible. She didn't frame it in that way at all. In a very mature way, she said, this is the behavior that displays when you are unhappy with us. And two things happened. I allowed her to actually manage that process. I allowed her, but I took action almost immediately. I became aware of my own behaviors. And what she did was by managing up, was allowing me to manage her better. Now, I'm not sure if that if another manager would have had the same kind of response and reaction as I did, but I think one of the things that's really important is what Balji said, is you need to know people. You need to know, right? I mean, how they work so that you need to know what interventions you can bring about. So really, managing me allowed her to bring out the best way of managing her. Um, and then I think when you manage up, you also recognize that you have the influence to change the way you, but also your colleagues are being managed. I think that's quite important. So that's what it means to manage up. Dana Brownlee is a consultant who has done a lot of work around management and team building, etc. And she did really interesting research on people's relationships with their management, with their managers, and found some fascinating stuff. I mean, rather than people really whinge about how badly they were managed, a lot of people were expressing the need for managers to understand them better, but also people who managed up as well as managed down expressed the need for people to really understand what the challenges of management and managing were. So Dana actually describes managing up as being a subordinate being able to work to customize their own style and their own behaviors to better suit their manager, right? And so kind of understanding that this manager is really kind of bam 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 bam, and so wants short sharp responses, but this manager really wants to take time and think through things and being under and so basically taking steps to make their jobs easy, the manager's job easier in an attempt to optimize the success of everyone. So I think, I mean, I find that really um, if I think about why I would want somebody to also manage up and somebody to manage down, for me it really is that issue of better communication, right? I mean, there's just a two-way stream of communication with your manager. You really are have a relationship that works for both of you, not just for one of you. You have an improved relationship, but you also have a more productive relationship that is based on mutual respect and understanding. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more. But here's the thing about managing your boss. It's an activity, it's an action. It doesn't happen by osmosis. It doesn't happen because you're interacting every day. You really have to set out to be aware, to really kind of take actions around it. And there are three steps that we're going to kind of unpack in greater detail in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so. But it really kind of starts off by thinking and caring enough about your boss and the way she works, understanding your boss, understanding how what drives your boss, what motivates your boss. And sometimes you can really only do that by understanding ourselves, right? By understanding yourself. What motivates you? what works for you? What do you stand for? Why are you doing what you're doing? Because you also need to realize if you're aligned. Um, I've walked out on one job and I left the job because the person who managed me was not aligned to what I stood for. Um, and I had no regrets. I had absolutely. I mean, actually, I walked out on two jobs. Um, um, I left my position as an editor when I felt that I could no longer work with the company director because we weren't not bec because we weren't aligned. We weren't aligned in values. We weren't aligned for what we wanted to do. Um, and I'm comfortable with actually doing that, right? I'm comfortable with moving away if it's not aligned to my values. Um, I walked out on one job because it didn't matter what I did. The manager and I didn't function in a way that was respectful. He wasn't respectful to me and other staff members. And I can do many things, but I cannot work for someone who doesn't respect people. So I've left those positions. But understanding that relationship, understanding who you are, understanding really what you're looking for is quite important. You really want to be able to understand and think about that process of what does it mean to actually when do you give feedback and when don't you give feedback? And it was really interesting because this issue actually comes up in Dana Brownlee's research because she notes that very often for people the idea of managing your boss is giving advice, is giving is telling them what they're doing wrong, but in fact that's not managing the boss. To manage the boss, it really is to understand the boss and to understand how they work well. Many years ago, we were doing a media management course, and one of the participants worked for a government-owned news agency. And what happened was the government, the new president came in, he fired the editor, and he appointed someone from the university, somebody who had no media experience whatsoever, had basically, I think, didn't even do comms, but government appointed this person as the editor. And the woman told me that it didn't matter what people did. He didn't understand journalism. He didn't understand journalism processes, etc. And she wanted to advocate for a particular change. And so what she did was she wrote a short academic paper that she referenced academically. She cross-referenced to papers. She did it in an academic format and she sent it to him and he read it and he approved it. He signed it off. And she said it's because she watched everyone else approach him as if they were approaching an editor who had editing experience, etc., and not have any success. And so understanding that he came from academia, understanding that that was his world, she actually approached him from his world. I think the next politician who came into power replaced that person. So it was a short-term game. But it really struck me that if you're managing your manager, that's one of the things you want to do is to be able to understand what do they understand, how do they function, how do I approach them. The next thing is to actually take time to develop a relationship. So the Bongi, the woman that I was telling you about, actually sat down and told me we were a close-knit unit. We were all invested in each other's success. So I think that that made her feel comfortable to be able to speak to me. So we had a relationship. If you don't have a relationship, it's really difficult for you to be able to give feedback. That could be hard, right? You want to be thinking about that. And then once you've developed that relationship, you need to actively maintain it. You need to relationships are built over time. They don't suddenly happen. We don't kind of settle down and suddenly we're all good friends. Think about your own friendships, even if you're not seeing each other all the time, you're sending messages, you understand where they are. So, how do you manage your boss? And there's a really good Harvard Business Review um, um, paper called Managing Your Boss by Cotter. It's co-authored by Cotter, and it's really got very, very step-by-step instructions, so that if you're having a real problem at the moment, I would suggest that you try and find it, and we can speak about it also during your coaching session. But one of the things that Kotta and them really do is they have this this really kind of step-by-step guide. And the first thing is really to think about what is your working style versus your manager's working style. If your manager, for example, is the kind of person who is short, sharp, really wants things to be able to, wants you to catch up really quickly, and your working style is to have things explained in great detail, how do you reconcile those two? And I've had that situation where I like to say, this is what we need to do, boom, 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 boom. And once had a staff who didn't want the boom, 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 wanted the boom and then a long explanation and a boom and a long explanation. And I found it difficult to work with her until I began to kind of literally kind of pause myself to say, okay, you need to go through everything step by step, and make sure that she understands every step. So, are the working styles compatible? What can you do to make your working style more compatible, right? Maybe you even need to explain to them, look, this is the way I prefer to be briefed, this is what I need to be done. What if you have somebody who says one thing and then when you arrive gives something else, right? I mean, when you produce what you think they said that they wanted, um, suddenly they change their mind. So understanding the working style of your manager also allows you to manage it to says, okay, this is somebody who changes their mind between giving the instruction and receiving the finished product. I need to have this in writing. And if they won't put it in writing, let me put it in writing and send it back to them. Right? It's by understanding the differences in your working style that you can also manage the risk a lot better. So, what is their working style versus what is my working style? And are our working styles compatible? Um, what are their expectations and what are your expectations? I've sometimes been called in to manage, to coach a team where things aren't working well. And one of the first things I always check is, are there common goals? Does everyone understand what they're working towards? If I'm talking about a team that produces stories, does everyone understand what a successful story for this team would be? Right? I mean, what is the defining story for your publication? What are the touch points that make the story good, in the eyes of your manager? So can you are we clear on that? But also, what are your expectations? Are they expecting 5 stories a week from you, and you're expecting to produce one great story a week? Are your expectations clear? And are they aligned? For me, assumption is the biggest issue. Assumption that people understand what you meant, assumption that you understand what your manager meant, and so I want to teach you something really simple, which is when you're having conversations with people, and it's a critical conversation where you're agreeing on way forward, on work forward, is to repeat back to them what you think that they are asking. So basically to say to them, so what you're asking for is so many stories with this, with so many sources, with pictures, with video, etc. So that you don't assume that you've understood, but that you've actually verified. So what you're expecting, what you want, what you're asking for, repeat it back to them. If your manager is the kind of person who you think might actually contradict you afterwards, go ahead and put it down in writing. Say, thanks for the discussion. Just to confirm, boom, 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 this is what we agreed to. So never assume that the expectations are aligned unless until you have both agreed that the expectations are aligned, and that's what they are. So how do you communicate? There are some people that I can say, do a story on the conference. And I'll know that they know all the assumptions of what the story needs to be about, what the angles need to be, how many words, etc., etc. And there are other people who I would have to say, do a story about the conference. I want it to be 400 words. I want you to use as many different people as possible. I want you to do this. I want this to be I want you to think about this as the angle, etc., etc. Understanding how people work, both up as well as to the people you manage, is really, really important. Is there a clear flow of communication? Do people really understand the expectations and how they can communicate with you? One of the issues that I have right now is there's so many platforms to communicate. You can communicate on Slack, you can communicate on WhatsApp, on Signal, on Telegram, on I'm trying to think of others, right? I mean, you can get messages all over the show, and the reality is you need to be clear about when I'm communicating with my manager, this is the platform that I'm always checking, this is the platform that I'm always following through on. The next thing about managing your manager really is dependability and honesty. If you say you're going to do something, if you then you must do it. If you say that you are out of the office, then you must be out of the office. If you say you're working from home, then you must be working from home. Dependability and honesty, your integrity is critical for you as a journalist, but it's also critical for you for your interpersonal relationships. People must feel like they can rely on you, that if you say something, that if you say, I can't do something now, I have a family crisis, I need to go home and do that, but I will finish it off before end of day, then finish it off before end of day. And then I think the last thing that Cotter really talks about, which I think is fundamental, is that in your mind, your manager relationship is just you and your manager, and you are the most important person in your view, and that's to be understood. But you need to really have an understanding of who else your manager is managing, what other crises he or she is dealing with, everything else that they're doing then, so that you're not going to the manager and setting up an hour-long conversation about a minor issue, that you're making good use of your manager's time and your manager's resources, that you are not creating a mountain out of a molehill, but when there is a crisis, that you are actually making sure that you're allocating enough time of it. Also, really, if you're a manager, but also if you are trying to talk to your manager in anything, make sure that your manager has actually allocated time where they can just they can speak to you. Do a Zoom call, right? Do a one-on-one. Allocate, say it's going to take 30 minutes, an hour. This is an important conversation. I've been having really good meetings allocated to 15 minutes or 30 minutes, right? Like really, really strong. So make sure that you're making good use of time and resources. And you can do a lot more detail on that in the HBR Managing Your Boss case study. The next thing really is what managing up is not. And this is important. It's not giving your boss advice or suggestion. It's about asking questions and giving information. Is this the best way for us to do it? Would you consider how about what else could we think about, etc. So it's not giving your boss advice or suggestions. It's not being friends. I don't need to be a friend with my boss in order to have a good relationship with my boss. I can be friendly with my boss, but I don't need to go for drinks with them. I don't need to have lunch with them. I don't have to have a girls' afternoon. I don't need to have any of that. I don't even need to like them, right? I mean, then they don't need to be someone that I would choose to spend an afternoon with. Um, but it is about respecting them. It is about respecting the work environment and respecting the work that needs to be done. So it's not about being friends, even though we can be friendly. It's not about simply getting a clear instruction. right? It is about making sure that yes, there is flexibility in the relationship. We can move, we can shift, we can understand what we are trying to achieve. Um, Sometimes we can be very task driven, but you told me to do this, 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 this. But in fact, what we want to have is a relationship with our boss where we are output orientated, when we are really about achieving the common goal. Um, I'm going to give you this presentation, so don't worry about it. I know that we've got 1 minute left, and so you'll be able to read the full presentation. So, Dana Brownlee, who I told you did the incredible research about managers and the people they manage, said that when you're managing up, it really is about anticipating problems and then actively working to prevent them. So you're invested in the manager's success because their success is your success. Um, to actively work to make your boss's job easier by being reliable and productive. To adjust your own style of working or your own style of communication to be able to suit your manager, right? To have the conversations to be able to work really quickly. Um, to be flexible, to speak truth when it's necessary, right? To be the one to say what needs to be done, and then to quickly navigate what needs to be done.